Hello and welcome to this explainer. If you're the kind of focused learner who is absolutely driven to understand the deeper, underlying mechanisms of the world we live in, well, you are exactly in the right place today. We're going to be exploring one of the absolute greatest, most profound mysteries of the human mind. Over the course of our time together, we're going to completely rethink human cognition, the very nature of reality itself, and exactly what happens when the boundaries between the two start to shift. Now, I want to be clear right up front. This isn't just about pathology or looking at a list of medical symptoms. No, this is a bold, massive new framework that forces us to question the entire evolution of human consciousness itself. We are diving incredibly deep into a theory that completely redefines the very architecture of how you, me, and every human being on Earth actually perceives our existence. So let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this because this single, deceptively simple question on the screen right now completely changes how we must view human cognition. Just think about it for a second. Why is this condition only possible in humans? It's not asking how it happens mechanically or what the specific daily symptoms are. We're asking why. Out of all the incredibly complex life forms on this planet, and remember, many of those animals have highly advanced nervous systems, complex social structures, and deep emotional capacities, why is this specific phenomenon exclusively human? If we truly want to understand this condition, we absolutely cannot simply look at it as a random glitch or some sort of accidental, unfortunate misfire of the brain. The very fact that only humans experience this means it has to be inextricably linked to how the human mind uniquely evolved to operate over millions and millions of years. It's a feature of our specific evolutionary journey.
So to put this into perspective, let's look at how modern psychiatry has traditionally approached this. Historically, it's been viewed purely as an illness. The focus has been heavily placed on things like genetics, neurodevelopment, dopamine abnormalities, and clinical deficits. And I want to be super clear here, those biological medical explanations are absolutely crucial. They are vital for medical treatment and for alleviating immediate suffering. But while they explain the what and the how, they leave our fundamental evolutionary why completely unanswered. To truly understand this, we have to shift our entire paradigm. We must stop studying it purely as a medical deficit or a broken piece of machinery, and we have to start studying it as the ultimate key to understanding consciousness itself. It's actually a profound question of natural history and the mind's continuous, unstoppable generative action. It demands we look at the human mind not as a static object that just happens to break, but as a deeply dynamic, active process that shifts.
To help us wrap our heads around all of this, here is the intellectual scaffolding for the journey ahead today. First, we'll look closer at that big question, why only humans? Second, we'll introduce the multi-layered OSI-20 model. Third, we'll explore how reality is actually generated. Fourth, we'll look at the vital roles of language and the self. Fifth, we'll unpack the concept of an independent consciousness operating system. And finally, we'll bring it all together to reveal the true essence of human consciousness.
All right, Section 1, why only humans? Let's unpack this evolutionary mystery.
To really solve this puzzle, we have to recognize a massive, almost invisible assumption made by traditional theories of the mind. Most of the time, we assume the mind is a finished, polished product. We think of it as a static receiver of information that simply takes in data from the outside world, kind of like a digital camera passively recording a video of whatever's in front of it. But if we view the mind that way, we literally can never answer our opening question. Schizophrenia is not just a broken machine. It is a vital, glowing clue. It shows us that human consciousness operates so fundamentally differently from all other animals, specifically because it is a continuously generating, highly dynamic system. We don't just sit back and passively receive reality. Our minds are constantly, actively building it every single millisecond. So the vulnerability to this condition, it's actually a direct side effect of our mind's greatest evolutionary superpower.
Let's move to Section 2, OSI-20, multi-layered consciousness.
To really understand this dynamic, generative system we just talked about, let's look at how natural history actually builds its architecture over time. Evolution doesn't just throw away old versions and replace them with new ones. It stacks them. Think of it exactly like the OSI layers in a complex computer network. In tech, each new layer sits right on top of the previous one. It completely relies on the foundation below it, but it adds entirely new, incredibly complex capabilities. In nature, it works the same way. Basic physical interactions give rise to chemistry. Then, chemistry scales up and leads to biology and life. Life develops a nervous system. That nervous system eventually enables complex behavior, which in humans leads to language, and language eventually builds society, culture, and what we call the historical subject.
Each new layer includes all the biology and chemistry beneath it, but it creates entirely new, highly sophisticated rules for how we communicate and interact with the world. And that brings us directly to the OSI-20 layer communication subject model. Now, in this framework, we have to completely let go of the idea that human consciousness is a physical thing located in just one place. You can't just point to a single tiny cluster of neurons in an MRI and say, aha, right there is the consciousness. Instead, consciousness is essentially a booting up phenomenon. It is the result of all these evolutionary layers we just talked about operating simultaneously. Just like a massive, highly complex computer network coming online and syncing up, your consciousness is the emergent result of physics, biology, language, and society all running their distinct communication protocols at the exact same time. We are, at our core, multi-layered communication networks, seamlessly blending our base biological impulses with incredibly complex social and linguistic rules every single second of our waking lives. Moving right along to Section 3. This is where things get really fascinating. Reality is generated, not copied. I really want you to listen to this profound premise, because it flips everything we assume about daily life upside down. Consciousness is not a device that copies reality, but a system that generates it. Think about it. Humans never actually see objective reality in its pure, unfiltered form. We just don't. We are always constantly working with limited, fragmented sensory inputs from our eyes, our ears, and our skin. What you are experiencing as reality right now, in this exact moment, is actually your mind constantly constructing the world. It is rapidly filling in the blanks of that limited sensory data with your internal predictions, your deeply held memories, your linguistic frameworks, and your past experiences. Your brain is essentially a highly advanced, nonstop prediction engine. It is rendering the world in real time based mostly on what it expects to be there, rather than just passively recording what actually is there. Now, you might be wondering, how do we know the brain can do that? Well, the most vivid, naturally occurring proof we have of this immense generative power is dreaming. Think about a phenomenon we call the dream anchor. Have you ever experienced this? You are fast asleep, totally out of it, and a real-world alarm clock goes off in your bedroom. But inside your dream, your brain retroactively generates an entire, perfectly structured, vivid narrative. Maybe a bright red fire truck speeding by, or a huge crowd of people panicking and someone yelling, fire. And it leads perfectly, logically, up to the exact millisecond that the real alarm sounds. When you wake up, it feels entirely like that story was happening chronologically. But in reality, your current sensory input, that sudden jarring sound of the alarm, forced your consciousness to retroactively construct time, space, and causality in an instant just to make sense of it. It proves, without a doubt, that our brains are perfectly capable of generating incredibly convincing, entirely ungrounded realities in the absolute blink of an eye. So if our brains are constantly generating these highly convincing, instantaneous realities, you really have to ask, what keeps us sane? What keeps us tethered to the actual shared physical world around us? The answer is a concept called grounded meaning. You see, reality isn't some perfect objective truth we just passively observe. It is a stable probability distribution of interpretations. That sounds complex, but basically, your brain is making a million rapid-fire guesses about what is happening around you at any given second, and it continuously tests those guesses against the outside world. Through constant feedback, trial and error, and physical interaction with our environment and other people, those guesses become grounded. It is exactly like a scientist rigorously testing a hypothesis over and over until it's verified. Our consciousness is just that, the continuous, never-ending process of testing and grounding our internally generated meaning against the friction of the outside world. Let's look at the tool we use to do this in Section 4, language and recursive self-communication. According to this new paradigm, human language has dual functions, and one is vastly more profound than the other. The first function is pretty obvious, communicating with others using existing agreed-upon rules and grammar to navigate our daily survival, passing information back and forth. But the second function? That is where our true evolutionary power lies. It's called post-grammatical language generation. This is our incredibly unique human ability to intentionally break existing grammar and rules to explore, construct, and create entirely new concepts that don't even exist in the physical world yet. This rule-breaking ability is exactly how humans invent new philosophies, how we make breathtaking scientific discoveries, how we compose symphonies, and literally how we build entire civilizations from scratch. Our ability to break the rules and generate completely new meaning out of thin air is the very engine of all human progress and abstract thought. But here is the most vital feature of language in this whole framework.
We use language to talk to ourselves long before we use it to talk to anyone else. We call this recursive self-communication. Think about your own mind right now. You are constantly, silently talking to yourself throughout the entire day. You're interpreting past conversations, you're worrying about a presentation you have to do later, you're predicting the future. This internal, continuous, looping feedback of self-narration is actually what forms yourself or your ego. The self isn't a fixed, independent biological object sitting like a stone somewhere inside your brain. It is a constantly evolving, active model, and it is formed entirely through this continuous internal chatter, contrasting and communicating with the external world around you.
And that brings us to the climax of this explainer, Section 5, Schizophrenia as an Independent Consciousness OS.
So let's put all the puzzle pieces together. We have a multi-layered mind using recursive self-communication and rule-breaking language to constantly construct and generate reality. So the crucial point we have to look at is this. What actually happens when that grounding to the external world weakens? When that critical sensory feedback loop with physical reality starts to fade, our mind's incredible generative power doesn't just politely switch itself off. Not at all. Instead, that recursive self-communication and that post-grammatical generation begin to self-multiply. Without the outside world there to verify or correct them, these deeply internal meanings start to organize themselves. They eventually stabilize into an entirely closed, independent consciousness operating system. This framework completely redefines schizophrenia. It is no longer just a tragic loss of function, it is actually the inherent, massive generative power of the human mind running endlessly on an isolated, completely ungrounded loop.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how perfectly the clinical symptoms map onto this new theory. Suddenly, incredibly familiar symptoms translate perfectly into logical outcomes of our cognitive architecture. Let's take auditory hallucinations, for example. In this new paradigm, this isn't just a misfiring brain randomly hearing things. No, it is the person's own recursive self-communication, that constant internal dialogue we all have, becoming so severely ungrounded that the brain's operating system logically attributes it to an external other. What about delusions? Well, delusions are simply what happens when that internally generated meaning becomes so intense and powerful that it completely overpowers any sort of reality verification. And thought disorganization? That is post-grammatical generation, our unique evolutionary ability to break language rules, multiplying rapidly without the anchor of reality grounding to keep it cohesive and understandable to others. When you view it through this lens, it all makes complete, profound logical sense. The source material also points out a really important contextual factor here. This doesn't just happen in a biological vacuum. Society plays a massive, undeniable role in this dynamic. The text describes a concept called the strict society. Now, impartially speaking, this isn't just a society that happens to have a few rules. It is a deeply rigid structure driven by things like intense schooling, grades, hyper-standardization, and fierce economic competition. And this structure repeatedly, relentlessly forces a single, standardized operating system onto all humans. This immense societal demand for absolute conformity basically acts as a heavy symbolic shackle. It deeply suppresses that natural, wildly generative, rule-breaking capacity of the historical subject that we just learned is so absolutely foundational to how the human mind works.
And the stakes of this societal dynamic are incredibly high. Let's look at the contrast. When our mind's natural generative capacity is embraced, when it's nurtured and properly grounded in reality, the results are astounding. It leads to new science, boundless creativity, artistic masterpieces, and the continuous, beautiful advancement of human civilization. But when this deep innate generative urge is heavily suppressed by a strict societal structure, it doesn't just quietly disappear into the night. It turns inward. It forcefully manifests as intense psychological defense mechanisms. And over time, the text argues, these repeated, desperate defense mechanisms can actually take dynamic, flexible neural circuits and solidify them into rigid firmware, forcefully locking the mind's generative operating system into that isolated, closed loop we discussed earlier.
Finally, let's wrap this up with Section 6, the essence of human consciousness.
To summarize this incredibly profound thesis we've been unpacking, schizophrenia is not a strange, alien exception to human consciousness. Rather, it is the most vivid, naturally occurring experiment proving exactly how our minds work at their absolute core. It proves unequivocally that the human mind is essentially a generative, recursive, and reality-constructing system. Think about the magnitude of this. The exact same complex evolutionary mechanisms, our unparalleled ability to generate abstract meaning, to talk to ourselves internally, to purposefully break the rules of language to invent a future that doesn't exist yet, the very things that allow human civilization to exist in the first place are the exact same mechanisms that make this condition possible. They are two sides of the same coin. You simply cannot have the breathtaking, world-building brilliance of human consciousness without the inherent built-in vulnerability to it eventually becoming ungrounded.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this thought to deeply reflect on long after we finish today. We've seen that the human mind doesn't passively copy reality, it actively, aggressively generates it, rendering our experience moment by moment completely from scratch. If schizophrenia is the ultimate proof of this incredible generative power running without an anchor, then I have to ask you, how much of the reality you are looking at right now, how much of the physical world you navigate, the relationships you experience, and the truths you hold every single day is absolute, objective truth? And how much of it is actually just your own multi-layered consciousness constantly talking to itself in a very, very convincing loop? Thank you so much for exploring this massive paradigm shift with me today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.